live on ABC's KMET 1490am.com. Your number one spot right here for news and talk on the West Coast. I thank everyone for tuning in this morning. On the telephone line, I welcome to the program legendary bass player, songwriter of the 1960s American rock band Strawberry Alarm Clock. We welcome in the legendary George Bunnell. George, Brian C., honor to have you.
I'm good. How are you, Brian?
Oh, everything's good. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
So, George, reading about your history, you were born in Massachusetts. You moved out to Southern California with your family as a youngster, and that's really where your musical journey began, right?
Yes. Yeah. I was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and then we lived in North Andover, and then we moved to Norfolk, Virginia, because my dad was in the Navy. And then by the time I was 3, my dad said, "We're going to California," and so we headed out west. and the very first thing that happened was we moved in with my grandfather's brother, my granduncle and grandaunt, and their boys had a band in the house. And so we lived in their house for, I don't know how long, like a month or a couple of months before my grandfather bought his own house. And because we moved out here with my grandparents and my parents. So, and they had one of them played accordion and organ, and the other one played guitar. And they rehearsed with their band in the house that we were all staying in. And that was it. I was 3 years old, and I was completely amazed.
Amazing. So that's really where you built up your chops, huh?
Well, not really, but I guess so. I mean, because what ended up happening was I started to take accordion lessons, and when I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something, and then when I was 7, I think I started violin. But all these things were not getting to me, and then surf music happened, and I had to have a bass. I think I was 12 or something, and that did it.
Now, George, when discussing the birth of Strawberry Alarm Clock, the origins of the band, you have to take into consideration 2 prior bands, right? The Sixpence and the other one being Buffington Rhodes. Is that correct?
Sort of. Buffington Rhodes was originally called Waterford Train. It became Buffington Rhodes after the Alarm Clock. And the Sixpence were... So the Sixpence and Waterford Train used to play at parties. And our drummer, which is Randy Seal, he got an audition with the Sixpence because their drummer, Gene Gunnels, quit the band. And he had just finished recording the track to Incense and Peppermints with the iconic drum, hi-hat, and everything break in the middle. And then he quit the band because nothing had happened yet. So that was a fateful day for him. But anyway, Randy Seal got the audition, and he was in our band. They said, well, now we have a deal. We're gonna do an album, and we need a bunch of songs. And Randy said, well, our bass player and his friend Steve Bartek, they write a lot of songs, and Steve plays flute, so I'll have him come over and to a rehearsal and play the songs. So we did, Steve and I, and Ed King, the guitar player, said, I love all these songs. And so he and Mark Weitz were the leaders of the Alarm Clock, and so they just said, we're going to do all these songs. And so in the studio, what ended up happening was they said, well, the bass part, why don't you play the bass part, and the harmony. And then they had Steve play flute on a couple of the songs, on Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow and The World's on Fire. And so then they said, can you be in the band? And I said, I had just turned 18 in June of 67. And so just before I was 18, there was no way. I was supposed to go to college and everything. and my mother said, no, 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 no. And then, but I was 18, and so I could do whatever I wanted is what I told them. And to their chagrin, you know, but I didn't go to college. But he was only 15, and his mom said absolutely not. So he went to college, and then he ended up getting his degree in music composition, and now he's Danny Elfman's right hand, and he's his orchestrator, and he was the lead guitar player of Oingo Boingo, and you know, so he's had a full-on major league career because he's finished college, I think. But he still plays with us. And the funny thing is now we have both drummers. We have Randy Steele and Gene Gunnels. Both of them are in the band now and have been since, I don't know, 2007 or so. And so that's the way it went. We still have Mark White, the original keyboard player. And so there's actually 5 of us in the band that played on the first album.
So I mean, this is so fascinating. So here you are, you graduated from high school, you're getting ready to join the big leagues in music, getting ready to perform on stage with, you know, acts like the Beach Boys and Buffalo Springfield. I mean, what was your reaction to that?
Oh, well, the Beach Boys had been like my favorite band, you know, during the surf music thing when I was learning to play, you know, back in like 61 or 2 or whatever it is when they came out. But here in California, that's all you heard was, you know, the Beach Boys, and
right.
You know, and then by the time '66 came around, I was a huge Buffalo Springfield fan, and I was also like a Who fan, so I liked all the British stuff too, and the Yardbirds, and we ended up opening for the Who and opening for the Yardbirds, and then we got one day Mike Love of the Beach Boys walked into a recording session and said. And he goes, "Hi, I'm Mike Love." And I went, "Wow, you are." You know, he was like so recognizable. And then he goes, "Yeah, we want you guys to open for us on 2 tours, our annual Thanksgiving tour and our Easter tour." And so one was at the end of '67, and the next one was in April of '68. And so I was like, "Wow!" And I was just in the little. The lobby of the studio tuning or restringing actually a guitar for Ed, and then the little red light was on. I couldn't go in, so then the red light went off, and I brought Mike into there, and he had this clipboard with the whole tour roster on it and what we're going to do, and I couldn't believe it, and then the band couldn't believe it, and then there we were. The next thing we know, we were on a plane and sent off to, I think, Washington, D.C. was our first show with them. And it was, you know, like November, I think November 19th was our first concert at Constitution Hall with the Beach Boys and Buffalo Springfield. And so we walk into it's the sound check. So we walk into the theater and it's empty, except for the Buffalo Springfield is sitting across a row in the middle, and the Beach Boys are on stage with their full ensemble. They had all of them, no Brian Wilson, but all of the rest of them, and then they had like a 12-piece backup band that had violins and, you know, brass and flutes and everything, and they were on stage, and they're at the time their leader, their band director was Daryl Dragon. And he was about to count off a song, but then they saw us walk in and they went, "Hey, Strawberry Alarm Clock." And then we're like, you know, like we're kids. And they're all grown up. And they're all famous. You know, so we're completely freaked. And so Neil Young turns around and the Buffalo Springfield, and they go, "Hey, come down here, sit in this row." So we go down. I happen to have been the first one, and I sit, and Neil was the last one on their group, and so I sat next to Neil, and I said in an 18-year-old idiotic way, I said, "Oh wow, surf music," and he goes, and he looked at me and he goes, "Prepare to have your mind blown." And I went, "Oh," I shut up so quick, and I don't know if I talked again for like a couple of days, but they started, Daryl Dragon counts off God Only Knows, and that was it. I never had heard anything like that live, it was the most incredible thing. And I mean, the hair on my arms stood up. I was like, oh man, and they went through that whole song with all the beautiful harmonies and the strings and the whole thing. And then they go, okay, Strawberry Alarm Clock, come on down and do your sound check. And we're like, oh no. Anyway, that's what it was like. We were starstruck and we were in shock.
We're talking with Strawberry Alarm Clock's George Bunnell, who joins the program. George, give us the little history. I know you must have mentioned it so many times throughout your career, but for my audience here, the formation of the song Incense and Peppermints, it had a lot of hands in that making, right?
Yeah, it was, it had a metamorphosis happen to it. What it was Mark White, the keyboard player, he had written it on his mom's upright piano at her house. And he had the verse, no words. He only had music. And he was writing it as an instrumental. And he had all the verses, and he had the end of the song, the Sha-La-Las. And then he didn't have a bridge, so he called up Ed King, the guitar player, and he goes, Ed, I need a bridge. So Ed went over to Mark's parents' house and came up with the little bridge, the little yeah girl, that part was, and you have the look at yourself, and so that was Ed's input. He wrote the bridge, but it didn't have lyrics, like I said, and so they went in the studio and they recorded it with the drummer, with Gene Gunnell, just the three of them, and because Ed knew exactly what he wanted, so he played bass on it. And he played guitar, rhythm guitar and lead guitar. And then Mark played piano and played the exact thing that he did on piano on his Farfisa organ. That was going to be the record. And Gene did the drums, and he overdubbed the cowbell and a couple of cymbals hits. And so they finished the recording, and the producer said, you know what? He goes, and the producer, his name was Frank Slay, and he was also a songwriter and a publisher. And he had a whole stable of songwriters. And one of them was this guy, John Carter, and his partner named Tim Gilbert. And he said John Carter had a title called Incense and Peppermints, but no lyrics. But he thought that the title suited the music to the song. And he said, can I have him try to write some lyrics for it? And they were like, oh, well, okay. They thought it was going to be just the flip side of this novelty song that Mark had written called The Birdmen of Alcatraz, which is the flip side of the 45 of Incense. And that's what they thought was their hit. And so, because in those days, you did novelty songs if you tried to get, if nothing else worked, if everything else failed, you could do a novelty song. Anyway, so they tried to, that's what they thought they were going to do, was have an instrumental on the back of it that nobody would play. Well, what ended up happening was John Carter came back, and the lyrics were pretty cool. And nobody knew what it really meant, and he didn't either, as it turned out. He got it out of a rhyming dictionary. He basically just started with something, and with Incense and Peppermints, and then looked up, they're okay, meaningless nouns, and then he just kept going from there. And then then he came back to John Carter came back to the band with what he had done, and he had written a little melody and all these lyrics to the song, and he had it on a 2-track tape. And so the band tried everybody in the band tried to sing it. We had a bunch of singers. So Randy, the drummer, tried to sing it. It didn't work. And Mark White's tried to sing it, and it was too high for him. He's like a baritone. And so it wasn't work. And then Lee Freeman, he needed it to be higher. So it didn't work for him. And they didn't really particularly care for Randy's voice on it. And so what ended up happening was Greg Munford, who was also another singer-songwriter that the same producer and manager were working with. He was in the studio hanging out because he was always there. And so he was just listening, and they said, "Hey, Greg, why don't you try it?" And so he goes, "Oh, okay." So, because they thought it was just a demo. So Greg gets up and he sings it, and it's right in his key, right in his perfect little zone, And he didn't even have to try hard at all, and he did that vocal in like one take. And then Frank Slade, the producer, goes, "Okay, that's it. That's perfect. Let's just go with that. It's just a demo anyway." And so they go in and they finish mixing the thing, and they realized that they really like, and they started putting all the harmonies on, which Randy Seal did most of the harmonies, and he came up with all the sha-la-la stuff and everything, and then he sang like a duet in a verse with Greg, but Greg was no more around, and then they asked Greg to be in the band because after the song was done, it was like really nice. And Greg says, "No, I don't want to be in the band." He goes, "I have my own. I'm in my own thing here," and so he refused to be in the band. So then there was the song, all finished, and then they released it. And then in Santa Barbara, it was where it first got played, but it was the other side that first got played. But then Johnny Fairchild listened to Incense and Peppermints and said, No. Birdman of Alcatraz isn't the lead single, either because the original 45 has Birdman of Alcatraz as the A side and the other one as the B side, which is how they used to do it. And so for the DJs. And so he said, "No, I think that Incense and Peppermints is the proper one." And so he started playing it and played the hell out of it, and then it became the most requested song of the week in Santa Barbara. And to the point where everybody thought the band was from Santa Barbara, but we were from L.A. And so then the manager says, "Okay, well, we're just going to take that success and we're going to go to Palm Springs and we're going to get that radio station to do the same thing." So that's what happened. We kept going from city to city with it, and then eventually L.A. started playing it, and then Bill Drake took it, who owned a bunch of CBS stations across the country, and then he jumped on it and put it on all these stations, and damn, it was a hit.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, when you have an iconic song that made it to number 11 on the Billboard charts, I mean, it's such a hard task to duplicate. But again, do you ever get tired of hearing, "Oh, the band is a one-hit wonder"? Do you ever get tired of hearing that?
Yeah. It comes up a lot. So it went to number 1, not 11. Our album went to number 11. The
Right,
Incense and Peppermints.
Right.
The first album went to number 11. The single went to number 1.
Number 1, right.
Yeah, on Billboard and Cashbox. And so, yeah, it was a huge thing to try to follow up, of course. But
I mean, you were getting more airplay than the Beatles at that time.
It was crazy. Yeah, they were kind of like in an in-between thing, the Beatles. And even the Beach Boys said, "You guys have no idea what this means," because our record, when we went on tour with them, was November. The first day was November 19th, and November 22nd is when it hit number 1. And so the Beach Boys were telling us, they go, "That's amazing, and you have no idea what this means to have a number 1 record. That's so elusive, Everybody gets close and then just falls back off." He goes, "You guys did it."
But George, the band had other hits like "It's Tomorrow," which made it number 23. Yeah. I mean, you had a bunch of few hits that did not. Yeah. That's really underrated.
Yeah, I know. It got overshadowed, but yeah, you know what? There was a couple of things happened at the time that we didn't agree with as a band. I mean, the band was kind of in agreement with themselves, But here's something that was really a sour grapes thing that happened was, so I told you that Mark White and Ed King wrote all that music. Well, when it came time to send the publishing in, the manager, not the producer, but the manager, wanted his name on the song because he paid for the session. And the producer said, no. It doesn't work that way. And so they argued about it. And then the producer said, just pick. He goes, I've got to send in the copyright. Just pick 2 names. And then he said, well, I want everybody's name on it. And he goes, no, you're not going to do that. And so he wouldn't acquiesce, And so the producer sent the copyright in with only John Carter and Tim Gilbert, who were the lyricists. And so Ed King and Mark White didn't get credit. And they never made a dime off of the songwriting royalty.
That's ridiculous. And also, you created a song called "What's It Made Of," right? And didn't the producers or someone change the name to "Strawberries Mean Love"? So you had no autonomy.
That was the manager again. Yeah, it was a song that I wrote with Steve Bartek, and the manager said, "Well, I want to change the lyrics to Strawberries Mean Love." And we're like, we didn't have any, they had total control over what happened. So that's what happened.
So when you left Strawberry Alarm Clock, what was your next endeavor? You went on to play for another band?
That was Buffington Rhodes. So, which was basically my band that I had come out of. I went back into, and so did Randy Seal. We both went back to that band with Steve Bartek, and we rehearsed, and then we finally got really tight after we all lived together. And after several months of rehearsing, we went and did a concert with Procol Harum and Chicago Transit Authority. It was Chicago's first appearance in L.A., and Love, the band Love, were also on the bill. And that was, and we got the LA Times, we got the big write-up. We got it. It said, certainly the freshest and possibly the best band of the evening was Buffington Rhodes. And we were like, yeah, because it was with Procol Harum in Chicago. It was kind of a big deal. And then we played at the Whiskey with that same, we played at the Whiskey a Go-Go like a couple of weeks later, and that was with Chicago and 10 Years After, Alvin Lee and 10 Years After. And that was another successful one. And then all of a sudden that band self-destructed. It was going to do some stuff. As a matter of fact, our drummer, Randy, and the keyboard player from Buffington Rhodes was named Fred Schwartz. Fred Schwartz wrote the music to World's on Fire, and our band recorded it. And it was originally called Colors on the Wall, and the manager, we had gone in the studio and recorded the music, and Fred said, no, I want my band to do that song. And so the manager said, I don't care, we're doing it, and I'll change the lyrics, and you can't copyright the music, which is what happened with Mark and Ed on Incense. And so the manager went and changed all the lyrics to The World's on Fire, and Fred got nothing. He didn't get any credit or anything. But anyway, that's another crazy story.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And I got a couple of minutes left. So I'm looking at your website, strawberryalarmclock.com. So what's going on? What are you currently working on? What's your current projects?
Well, we're going to be playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go on Friday, December 16th. Less than a week from now. And so we're going to be rehearsing all week here. And we were rehearsing all last week, too. So we get ready for that. And we got, our 5 guys from the first album still intact. We only have one guy that's new, and his name's Howie Anderson, and he's been in the band since 86. So He's hardly new, yeah. But yeah, and then a few guys passed away. Lee Freeman, the original lead singer, and Ed King, the original lead guitar player. Ed King had gone on to Lynyrd Skynyrd, and Ed wrote "Sweet Home Alabama," co-wrote it, and but anyway, he passed away. And then Jimmy Pittman was on the "Good Morning Starshine" album, and he passed away. That was another bummer thing. The "Good Morning Starshine" album it came out almost the same day as Oliver's version of "Good Morning Starshine," and Uni didn't put any promo behind the alarm clock, or not much anyway. And Oliver was a new thing, and that his record company jumped all over it. Everybody was taking songs from Hair and having hits, and so that was why they did "Good Morning Starshine." But the alarm clock lost out on that, bit.
Yeah, and
but
they're
it
telling
charted.
me. Oh, I'm sorry. They're telling me I have 1 minute left. The final question. I mean, when you sit back and reflect on your career, George, does it ever? Are you ever in awe how important the alarm clock is to the fabric of American pop culture music?
I don't know if we're overtly aware of it, but we are somewhat. We know that there was an imprint, and we know that we're a reference point for the '60s. We know certain things, and we're proud of it. For the most part, we had a crooked manager, and he stole a lot of stuff from the band, and he's gone now too. But it was kind of a rough little road, but it was amazing at the same time. It's like you wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, amazing career. Listen, a great job this morning. Incense and Peppermints lives on. I hear it all the time here on the East Coast. So, it's an honor to have you.
Thank you. And hello to all my cousins on the East Coast. It's back in Connecticut. I have a bunch of them.
Listen, yeah, now anytime you want to come on, George, just send me an email.
Okay. Will do.
All right. So the website, strawberryalarmclock.com, the legendary bass player, George Bunnell. Until next week, happy collecting to all.